Under the museum's dome was a cafe that sold snacks and beverages. The first time she visited the museum, she had eaten lunch there with Kyle. Matthias started walking in that direction. Noticing at once where he was headed, she stopped and frowned at him. "It was nice to see you, Your Grace, but I'll be on my way now." He looked over his shoulder at her. Catching her breath, she curtsied to him and started to walk the other way. "Stop right there," he ordered. Ignoring him, she casually walked a few more steps, but ultimately wasn't able to get away. In the blink of an eye, he had dashed past her and now stood blocking her way. She could feel passers-by looking at them. "Why are you doing this, Your Grace?" she asked, looking around in annoyance. "I hate it." "You hate what?" "What you're doing. I hate it." His nonchalance was irritating her even more. "You can't do this," she said. Her hands started fidgeting, so she moved them to the straps of the bag she had slung over her shoulder and gripped them tightly. "So if you could please, would you like to do something that we shouldn't do then?" he asked, grinning. This provoked her anger even more. Frowning, she shook her head vigorously. "No?" Her hands started to tremble from the feeling of humiliation. "Absolutely not." She felt her cheeks burning, and she knew they were bright red. In a vicious cycle, embarrassment over the fact that she was blushing made her blush even more. Meanwhile, the Duke seemed completely relaxed. He slowly looked around, taking in the surroundings, then turned his gaze back towards her. "Having made this chance encounter in the capital with you, the orphan who lives on my estate, I would simply like to buy you a cup of coffee. Is there a problem with my making such a kind gesture?" Even while insulting her like this, his tone remained polite and detached. "There's not, is there?" The smile left his face, and his eyes went cold. "Don't you agree, Layla?" He then continued, walking towards the cafe. She let out a long, exasperated sigh as she watched him walk. She couldn't claim to know Duke Herhart well, but there was one thing about him she knew for sure, that he would use whatever means necessary to get what he wanted, and that the harder something was for him to obtain, the more he wanted it. Giving up, she strode along, baying him. Shortly after the order had been placed, the waiter brought out 2 cups of coffee. Steam rose from the cups between the two people sitting in silence. "I never would have expected to run into you in a place like this, Your Grace," Layla hesitantly began after finding the silence unbearable. "I didn't realize you were interested in natural history, so—" "I'm not," Matthias replied, cutting her off. He took a sip of his coffee. "You already know, Layla, I don't care about such things at all." "Then why did you?" "And you must realize this isn't a coincidence either." "No," she reflexively replied. Her body tensed up and her heart started beating faster. She would have rather remained a lowly orphan than he pitied. She didn't want it to become anything more to him. "All I know," her voice had started to tremble, so she gulped before continuing. "All I know is that you hate me, Your Grace." Suddenly, the memory of her first kiss flashed into her mind. She shut her eyes to try to rid her mind of it, but it was no use. She opened them again and saw Matthias' blue eyes gazing at her. The memories intensified and took hold of her. "You're right, I hate you," he calmly agreed. A wry smile formed on his face. "And now I hate you even more deeply, Layla." Soon the smile left Matthias' face, and he looked at Layla with a cold, harsh glare. She involuntarily gasped. Then, feeling that she no longer had the confidence to look at him anymore, she fixed her eyes on her coffee cup and said, "I'm going to be moving." "What?" "I'm going to be moving away, so that I won't disturb your estate anymore." "Where are you moving to?" "Anywhere but there." She clenched her fists to stop her hands from shaking. "Don't be afraid," she told herself, even though she knew it was no use. "Arvis isn't the only place I can live," she added, matching his cold tone. The Duke made no response, as if he found her words ridiculous. She felt like getting up and leaving right away, but suddenly something else that had happened the previous summer flashed into her mind. She remembered when, after she had refused to finish the food he had served her at his cabin, he had taken her hat and thrown it into the cold river. She didn't want to risk him reacting in a similar manner again, so she resolved to finish her coffee before leaving. Lifting the cup, she gulped down the hot drink, almost choking in the process. Once she could see the bottom of the cup, she gasped for air. "Layla," he said in a low, threatening tone. She stiffly reached into her bag and retrieved some coins, which she then set on the table. "What's that for?" he asked, chuckling. "It's to pay for my coffee," she replied, still looking at her hands. Do I seem like someone who needs to be reimbursed for a cup of coffee? Maybe not, but I don't want you paying for my coffee, Your Grace. Her fingers felt cold now, and her fingertips were turning white. She was persisting in her refusal to let him pay, however. They weren't at Arvis, after all. Look up, he said. No. Look up, Layla. Don't order me around like that, she said. Letting her anger show, she finally looked up at him. Her rage had wiped away her fear. I'm not your maid. My maid? Just because I was raised by Uncle Bill at Arvis doesn't mean that I'm your maid. Really? Then what are you? I'm nothing. Tears started to form in her eyes. I always have been and always will be. Her moist green eyes remained fixed on him as she rejected him.